Girl tells her father that there is a girl just like her at new school. Father was shocked to see the cardboard box marked Lily's room slipped from Daniel's sweaty hands as he fumbled with the house keys. Moving day in August was a mistake. The humidity pressed down like a wet blanket, and the unfamiliar suburban street swam in heat waves. But Westbrook was supposed to be their fresh start, a place where memories of Sarah's absence wouldn't haunt every corner. "Daddy, can I go explore the backyard?" 8-year-old Lily bounced on her toes, seemingly immune to the heat, her copper-colored ponytail swinging like a pendulum. Daniel managed a smile. "After we get the essentials inside, kiddo. I promised pizza for dinner, remember?" She had Sarah's eyes, that bright hazel with flecks of gold, and the same freckles scattered across her nose like cinnamon dust. Sometimes it hurt to look at her, but mostly, she was the light that kept him going after Sarah's battle with cancer ended 6 months ago. That evening, as they sat on unpacked boxes eating pizza, Lily chattered about their new home, her upcoming first day at Westbrook Elementary, and whether the kids there would like her. Daniel reassured her as best he could, though his own anxiety about this move lingered beneath his confident exterior. They needed this change. The memories in their old house were suffocating them both. "Mom would like this house," Lily said suddenly, her voice small but steady. "It has a good kitchen for baking." Daniel's throat tightened. "Yeah, she would. Maybe we can try some of her recipes soon." After tucking Lily into her makeshift bed, a mattress surrounded by unpacked boxes, Daniel retreated to the porch with a beer. The neighborhood was quiet, fireflies blinking in the darkness. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister, Claire. "Hope the move went okay. Call if you need anything. Love you both." He typed back a quick reply, grateful for her support but too exhausted for conversation. Tomorrow was Lily's first day at school, and he needed to be on his game. Morning arrived with the chaos of finding Lily's new backpack among the boxes and making sure she had everything for her first day. She'd chosen her outfit the night before, blue jean overalls with a yellow t-shirt that made her eyes pop and her favorite unicorn sneakers that lit up when she walked. "You look perfect," Daniel said, snapping a photo as she posed by the front door. "Ready to conquer Westbrook Elementary?" She nodded, but he caught the tremor in her smile. Kneeling down, he adjusted her backpack straps. "It's okay to be nervous, Lil. New beginnings are scary, but they're also exciting. And I bet by the end of the day, you'll have made at least one new friend. Promise?" She held out her pinky. Daniel linked his pinky with hers. "Promise." The school drop-off line was efficient, if a bit impersonal. Daniel watched Lily walk through the front doors, her shoulders squared with determination, before heading off to unpack more boxes at home. The hours crawled by. Daniel arranged furniture, unpacked kitchen essentials, and fielded a welcome call from their new neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Abernathy who insisted on bringing over a casserole later that week. All the while, his thoughts kept circling back to Lily. Was she making friends? Did she like her teacher? Was she thinking about Sarah and wishing her mother was there for this milestone? When the clock finally struck 3:15, Daniel was already waiting in the pickup line, his fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. The doors opened, and children streamed out in clusters. He scanned for Lily's copper ponytail and spotted her bouncing down the steps, her face animated as she talked to a teacher. "Daddy, Daddy!" Lily burst into the car, her eyes wide with excitement. "You won't believe what happened today!" "Good day, huh?" Relief flooded through him. "Did you make a friend like I promised?" "Not just any friend." Lily buckled her seatbelt, practically vibrating with excitement. "I made a friend named Emily, and Daddy, she looks exactly like me." Daniel chuckled, pulling away from the curb. "Oh really? Another redhead?" "No, Daddy, you don't understand." Lily's voice grew serious. "She looks exactly like me. Same hair, same eyes, same height, same everything. Even Mrs. Peterson got confused a couple times. Well, they say everyone has a doppelganger somewhere in the world," Daniel said, glancing at Lily through the rearview mirror. "That's pretty cool you found yours on the first day." We even have the same birthmark. Lily pulled up her sleeve to reveal the small, crescent-shaped mark on her inner wrist that she'd been born with. Hers is in the exact same spot, Daddy. Isn't that weird? A chill ran down Daniel's spine despite the summer heat. That is unusual, he said carefully, trying to keep his voice light. Maybe it's a coincidence. And Lily leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. We have the same birthday. October 12th. We're both turning 9 this year. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. You're kidding. Nope. And she was adopted as a baby, just like you told me some kids are. Isn't that cool? It's like we're twins or something. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as memories Daniel had tried to suppress came rushing back. Sarah in the hospital, sweaty and exhausted after 18 hours of labor. The doctor's grim face. I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes. We did everything we could. One baby is healthy, but the other was stillborn. The tiny bundle he never got to hold, whisked away before he could even see her face. Sarah's inconsolable grief, compounded by complications that left her unable to have more children. Daddy? Are you listening? Lily's voice broke through his thoughts. Daniel forced a smile. Sorry, kiddo. Just thinking about what to make for dinner. Tell me more about your day. As Lily chattered on about her new teacher and classroom, Daniel's mind raced. It had to be a coincidence. Lots of little girls were born on October 12th. Plenty of people had unusual birthmarks. And Lily was at an age where finding similarities with a new friend was exciting. But as they pulled into their driveway, a nagging suspicion took root in Daniel's mind. What if it wasn't a coincidence? What if the daughter they'd been told was stillborn hadn't died at all? What if she had been stolen? Sleep eluded Daniel that night. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind replayed fragments of the past. Sarah's pale face in the hospital, the doctor's averted gaze when discussing their stillborn daughter, the rushed funeral arrangements for a child they never saw. Details that seemed innocuous at the time now took on sinister overtones in light of Lily's discovery. It's impossible, he muttered to himself in the darkness. Grief is making me paranoid. But by morning, the seed of doubt had grown. He called his sister while Lily was getting ready for school. Claire, do you remember anything strange about the day the twins were born? His sister's voice was cautious. Strange how? Daniel, what's going on? I don't know yet, he admitted. But Lily met a girl at school yesterday who looks identical to her. Same birthday, same birthmark, and she's adopted. A long silence followed. That's quite a coincidence. Too much of one? Daniel. Claire's voice softened. I know the grief comes in waves, even after all this time. But don't go looking for ghosts. It'll only hurt you more. Maybe she was right. But he had to see for himself. At the elementary school office later that morning, Daniel shifted nervously as he waited for Mrs. Peterson, Lily's teacher. Mr. Hayes? I'm Carol Peterson. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense haircut extended her hand. How can I help you? I was hoping to meet Emily's parents, he said, trying to sound casual. Lily hasn't stopped talking about her new friend, and I thought it might be nice to arrange a play date. Mrs. Peterson's smile dimmed slightly. Ah, the Crawfords. They're rather private. Emily is a lovely child, but her parents tend to avoid most school functions and social gatherings. I can pass along your contact information if you'd like. Daniel nodded, his unease growing. That would be great. Lily mentioned they look remarkably alike. It's quite extraordinary, Mrs. Peterson agreed. When Emily arrived this year, I actually thought we had Lily's file duplicated by mistake. The resemblance is uncanny. She glanced at her watch. The children are at recess now if you'd like to see for yourself. Sometimes kids exaggerate similarities. Through the office window that overlooked the playground, Daniel scanned the clusters of children until he spotted Lily's copper hair catching the sunlight. She was sitting on a bench, sharing a book with another girl. As they turned to look at each other, Daniel's heart stuttered. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was like looking at reflections in a mirror. The same delicate profile, the same dimple when they smiled, even the same way of tucking hair behind their ears. Identical, down to the smallest gesture. "My God!" he whispered, pressing his hand against the glass. "Quite something, isn't it?" Mrs. Peterson said. "I've never seen anything like it outside of identical twins." Daniel barely heard her, his mind racing. "Do you have Emily's records? Where was she adopted from?" Mrs. Peterson's expression grew concerned. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes, but that information is confidential. I can only share that with her legal guardians." He nodded mechanically and thanked her before leaving, his thoughts in turmoil. Outside in his car, he pulled out his phone and opened a search engine. Private Adoption Agency's Northbrook Hospital 2016. The hospital where Sarah had given birth was 3 states away, before they'd moved for Daniel's job. The search yielded several results, but one caught his eye: Angeline's Children, an agency that had closed abruptly in 2019 amid undisclosed administrative irregularities. Their website was defunct, but archived pages showed they had specialized in discreet, expedited adoptions for discerning families. Daniel's next stop was the county records office, where he requested a copy of his daughter's death certificate, something he'd been too grief-stricken to handle at the time. Sarah's parents had managed those details while he focused on caring for Lily and his hospitalized wife. "I'm sorry, sir," the clerk said after typing in the information. "I'm not finding a death certificate for an unnamed female Hayes born October 12, 2016, at Northbrook Hospital." Daniel's hands grew cold. "That's impossible. She was stillborn. There has to be a record." The clerk frowned at her screen. "Nothing in our system. Perhaps try the hospital directly? Sometimes there are filing delays." Back in his car, Daniel called Northbrook Hospital and spent 40 minutes being transferred between departments before finally reaching someone in records. "Yes, we have a record of twins delivered to Sarah Hayes on October 12, 2016, the voice on the phone confirmed. "1 live birth, 1 stillborn. But it appears the stillbirth certificate was never properly filed with the county. That's highly unusual." Daniel thanked her and hung up, his suspicions solidifying into dread. On impulse, he did another search, this time for news articles about Angeline's Children. A piece from a local newspaper caught his eye. "Former adoption agency under investigation. Whistleblower alleges fraudulent practices." The article mentioned a nurse who had come forward with concerns about the agency's methods. Her name was redacted, but it noted she had previously worked at Northbrook Hospital until 2018. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from his boss, reminding him about a deadline for a project he was supposed to be working on remotely during the move. But work seemed trivial now compared to the possibility that his daughter, Lily's twin, might be alive. That evening, as Lily described her second day with Emily, how they had the same favorite color, purple, how they both hated peas, how they'd started a secret club just for the two of them, Daniel studied her face, seeing it with new eyes. Had part of him always known? Had Sarah suspected? He remembered her recurring nightmares after the birth, how she'd sometimes wake up insisting she could hear 2 babies crying, not one. "Can Emily come over soon?" Lily asked, interrupting his thoughts. "I'm working on it, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I really want to meet her too." Later, after tucking Lily in, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad, mapping out everything he knew and suspected. The missing death certificate. The shady adoption agency. The uncanny resemblance between Lily and Emily. His daughter's twin hadn't died. She'd been stolen from them, and somehow, against all odds, had found her way back to her sister. Now he had to prove it. And he had to decide what he would do when he did. The following week passed in a blur of research and dead ends. Daniel called every former employee of Northbrook Hospital he could track down, most of whom refused to speak with him. His calls to the now-defunct Angeline's Children went to a disconnected number, and emails bounced back undelivered. Meanwhile, Lily and Emily's friendship flourished. They were inseparable at school, and Lily came home each day with new evidence of their similarities. They both sneezed exactly 3 times in a row. They both folded the corners of book pages instead of using bookmarks. They both had an inexplicable fear of butterflies. "It's like she knows what I'm thinking before I say it, Daddy," Lily said one evening as Daniel helped her with homework. "Is that normal with best friends?" Daniel's heart ached. "Some friends do have special connections," he said carefully. "Have you met her parents yet?" Lily shook her head. "Emily says they're really busy. Her mom is a lawyer and her dad does something with computers. But guess what? Emily has the same picture I have." Daniel looked up sharply. "What picture?" "The one of Mom holding me as a baby. Except Emily's picture has her adoptive mom holding her. But our baby blankets are the same. Both pink with little yellow stars." Daniel's blood ran cold. The hospital had provided those blankets. If Emily had one identical to Lily's. His breakthrough came unexpectedly the next day. While searching through public records, he found a lawsuit filed against Northbrook Hospital by a former employee named Judith Winters, alleging wrongful termination after she raised concerns about ethical violations. The case had been settled out of court, with all documents sealed. It took 3 days and a considerable bribe to a courthouse clerk to get Judith's contact information. "I don't talk about Northbrook anymore," she said when he finally reached her by phone. The woman's voice was raspy, like she'd spent decades smoking. "Please," Daniel begged. "My wife gave birth to twins there in 2016. One was declared stillborn, but I have reason to believe that was a lie." A long silence followed. "What's your name again?" "Daniel Hayes." "My wife was Sarah Hayes." Another pause. "Meet me at Riverfront Park tomorrow at noon. The bench near the duck pond. Come alone." Judith Winters looked nothing like Daniel had imagined. In her early 60s with steel gray hair and alert eyes, she resembled a retired school teacher more than a whistleblower. She smoked continuously as they talked, her fingers slightly trembling. "I remember your wife," she said after hearing Daniel's story. "Young, pretty. Red hair like wildfire. You were there for the delivery?" She nodded. "I was the charge nurse that night. Dr. Mercer handled the birth." "Dr. Mercer," Daniel repeated. "He's the one who told us our second daughter was stillborn." Judith took a long drag from her cigarette. "I didn't witness the birth itself. I was called in afterward. And?" Daniel leaned forward. "And both babies were alive when I saw them." Her voice was flat. "Healthy. Identical." The world seemed to stop. Daniel had suspected, had feared, had hoped, but hearing it confirmed made his knees weak. "What happened to her? To our other daughter?" Judith flicked ash onto the ground. "There was a system at Northbrook. Certain doctors worked with private adoption agencies, particularly Angeline's. When wealthy couples couldn't conceive or waited too long to adopt through conventional channels, these doctors provided solutions. They stole babies," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "From people who wouldn't or couldn't fight back. Single mothers. Immigrants without documentation. Families with financial problems." She met his eyes. "Or parents dealing with medical crises." "Sarah had severe postpartum complications," Daniel said. "She was unconscious for days afterward. We were told the stress of losing one baby had caused it. The perfect cover." Judith's mouth twisted bitterly. "She couldn't contradict their story, and you were too focused on her survival to question things too deeply. Why didn't you say something then?" Daniel demanded, anger rising in his chest. "I didn't know for sure at first. Just had suspicions." She stubbed out her cigarette. "By the time I collected enough evidence, they'd already buried my career and reputation. No one would listen. I'm listening now," Daniel said fiercely. "And I need your help to prove this." At home that evening, Daniel stared at the photo of Sarah holding newborn Lily. He'd always found it strange that they had so few pictures from the hospital. Now he understood why. Fewer images meant fewer questions. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Found Crawford address. 1422 Maple Avenue. Affluent neighborhood. Emily only child. Mother equals Margaret Crawford, corporate attorney. Father equals James Crawford, cybersecurity specialist. We'll keep digging. J. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Wealthy, well-connected parents. The exact type of couple who might pay handsomely for a private adoption, with no questions asked. Daniel was drafting a response when Lily burst through the front door, back from a playdate with a school friend. Daddy! Guess what? Emily's coming to school late tomorrow because she has to go to the doctor. She gets these really bad headaches sometimes, and she sees special doctors for it. Daniel froze. Headaches? Lily nodded earnestly. She says they started when she was 5. Sometimes she has to miss school because they're so bad. Daniel thought of Sarah, who had suffered from chronic migraines, a condition that had emerged in her childhood. The doctors had told them it was genetic. Another similarity. Another connection. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel drove past 1422 Maple Avenue. It was an imposing colonial house set back from the street, with manicured gardens and a luxury SUV in the driveway. Through a second-floor window, he caught a glimpse of movement, a small figure with copper hair. His missing daughter was so close he could almost reach her. Back home, he made a decision. It was time to confront the Crawfords directly. The truth had been buried for 8 years, too long for 2 little girls who belonged together, too long for him to continue mourning a daughter who wasn't dead. As he settled in to plan his approach, Lily appeared in the doorway of his home office, her face troubled. Daddy? I had a weird dream. Come here, sweetie. He opened his arms and she climbed onto his lap, something she'd done less often since turning 8. What was it about? I dreamed Emily was crying, she said, her voice small. And in the dream, I knew she was my sister. Like, not just my friend, but really my sister. Is that crazy? Daniel held her tighter, wondering how much to share. No, Lily. That's not crazy at all. Maybe, on some level, both girls already knew the truth that had been stolen from them. Daniel rehearsed his approach a dozen times before finally driving to the Crawford residence the following evening. The rational part of his brain warned him this was reckless. He should hire a lawyer, go through proper channels, gather more evidence. But the father in him couldn't wait another day. He parked across the street, watching as lights came on inside the house. It was nearly 7 p.m. on a Wednesday, hopefully late enough that both parents would be home. With a deep breath, he exited his car and walked up the immaculate stone pathway to the front door. His hand trembled slightly as he pressed the doorbell. Sophisticated chimes echoed inside. 30 seconds passed before the door opened, revealing a slender woman with dark hair cut in an expensive bob. Her expression was cautiously polite. "Can I help you?" she asked, one hand still on the door. "Mrs. Crawford? My name is Daniel Hayes." He watched her face carefully. "I'm Lily's father. Lily is friends with your daughter, Emily." Recognition flickered across her features, followed immediately by something else. Was it alarm? "Oh yes, Emily has mentioned Lily. I'm Margaret Crawford." She didn't offer her hand. "How did you find our address?" "School directory." He lied smoothly. "I was hoping to talk to you and your husband about something important." Margaret's posture stiffened. "My husband is on a conference call. Perhaps you could call the school to arrange a proper meeting?" "This can't wait," Daniel said, struggling to keep his voice even. "It's about Emily and Lily's unusual resemblance." The color drained from Margaret's face. For a long moment, she said nothing, then stepped back from the doorway. "You'd better come in." The interior of the Crawford home was as impressive as its exterior. High ceilings, tasteful art, and furniture that looked both beautiful and untouched. Margaret led him to a formal living room where nothing seemed out of place. "James," she called out, her voice strained. "Could you join us, please? It's important." A few moments later, A tall man with graying temples appeared, his expression shifting from annoyance to curiosity when he spotted Daniel. "What's going on?" "This is Daniel Hayes," Margaret said, her voice unnaturally controlled. "Lily's father." Understanding dawned in James's eyes. "I see." He turned to Daniel. "Emily is upstairs doing homework. Let's keep our voices down." "You know why I'm here," Daniel said, not a question but a statement. Margaret sank onto the sofa, her composure fracturing. "We suspected this day might come when we moved to Westbrook. The resemblance is too strong to ignore." She looked at her husband. "But we never imagined they'd end up at the same school." "So it's true," Daniel said, his heart hammering. "Emily is my daughter. My wife gave birth to identical twins, and one was stolen from us." James flinched at the word. "Stolen? It wasn't like that. Not from our perspective." "Then explain it to me," Daniel demanded, fighting to keep his voice down. "Explain how my daughter, who I was told died at birth, ended up as your adopted child." Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. "We tried to have children for 12 years. Multiple IVF rounds, 3 miscarriages. When we approached Angeline's children, they promised a quick, private adoption. A newborn with no complications. They told us the birth mother was a college student who wanted no contact," James added. "Everything seemed legitimate. We paid the fees, filled out paperwork, and never questioned why the process was so fast? Or why there were no court appearances." Daniel's voice rose despite his efforts. "We were desperate," Margaret whispered. "And they were so respected. Dr. Mercer himself vouched for the agency. The same doctor who delivered Sarah's babies. The same doctor who declared one finished without letting them see her." Daniel's anger threatened to overwhelm him. "When did you realize the truth?" he asked. The Crawfords exchanged glances. "About 3 years ago," James admitted. "We needed Emily's complete medical history when the migraines started. The agency was already closed by then, under investigation. A former employee contacted us, hinting that our adoption might not have been entirely above board. We hired a private investigator," Margaret continued. "He discovered enough to make us suspect Emily might have been separated from her birth family unethically. But by then, she was 5 years old. She knew only us as her parents. We were all she had." "So you did nothing," Daniel said, his voice cold. "We set up a trust fund in her name," James said defensively. "We planned to tell her the truth when she was older, help her find her birth family if she wanted. While her real father grieved a death that never happened? While her twin sister grew up without her?" Daniel pulled out his phone and showed them a photo of Lily. "They were meant to grow up together. My wife died believing she'd lost a child." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry. We didn't know." "Would it have made a difference if you had?" Daniel challenged. Before either could answer, a small voice came from the doorway. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" All 3 adults turned to see Emily standing there in purple pajamas, her copper hair, Sarah's hair, tumbling over her shoulders. Seeing her up close stole Daniel's breath. She was Lily's perfect mirror image, down to the small scar above her right eyebrow that Lily had gotten falling from her bike. But how was that possible? Genetic memory, he whispered to himself, remembering an article he'd read about identical twins separated at birth who developed the same injuries in the same places. "Emily, honey, this is Mr. Hayes," Margaret said shakily. "Lily's dad. We're just having a grown-up talk." Emily studied Daniel with an intensity that reminded him painfully of Sarah. "You look familiar," she said slowly. "Like I've seen you before." "Emily, please go back upstairs," James said firmly. But Emily remained rooted in place, her gaze locked on Daniel. "Sometimes I dream about a woman with red hair like mine," she said. "She sings me a lullaby about moonbeams. Is that weird?" Daniel's heart stopped. Sarah had made up that lullaby herself, had sung it to Lily every night until she was 4. "No," he managed to say, his voice breaking. "That's not weird at all." Something passed between them, recognition beyond the rational mind. Emily took a small step toward him, then another. Margaret made a choked sound. "Emily, please. I need to tell you both something," Daniel said, his eyes still on Emily but his words for the Crawfords. "I've spoken to Judith Winters, a former nurse at Northbrook. I have evidence that Emily was taken from us illegally. I can prove it." The room grew very still. "What are you going to do?" James asked finally. "What I have to," Daniel replied, tearing his gaze away from Emily to face them. "I'm going to bring this entire operation down, and I'm going to make sure my daughters know each other as sisters." In the silence that followed, Emily spoke again, her voice small but clear. "I dream about Lily too sometimes. Even before I met her. Is that why we look the same? Are we really sisters?" The question hung in the air, impossible to dodge, impossible to soften. Margaret drew a shuddering breath and reached for her daughter's hand. "Emily, we need to tell you something very important." The days following Daniel's confrontation with the Crawfords passed in a surreal blur. Margaret had broken down completely, confessing the full story to Emily while Daniel sat stunned in their living room. The little girl had listened with wide eyes, occasionally glancing at Daniel, her biological father, with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. "So Lily really is my sister? Not just my friend?" she had asked, her voice small but steady. When Margaret nodded, Emily's next question had been directed at Daniel. "Does she know?" "Not yet," Daniel had answered truthfully. "I wanted to be sure first." Now, a week later, Daniel sat across from Carolyn Reeves, a family attorney with a reputation for handling delicate cases. Her office was warmly lit, with degrees and children's artwork sharing equal space on the walls. "Mr. Hayes, I understand your desire to move quickly," she said, reviewing the notes and evidence he'd compiled. "But this situation is unprecedented. We're talking about potentially exposing a criminal enterprise that involves doctors, hospital administrators, and a high-end adoption agency." "I understand the complexity," Daniel replied. "But every day that passes is another day my daughters are kept apart." Carolyn leaned forward. "The Crawfords have been cooperative so far, which is in your favor. The fact that they've agreed to a DNA test shows they're accepting responsibility." "They didn't know," Daniel admitted reluctantly. "I believe they were victims of the scheme too, just more privileged ones. Nevertheless, once we file this case, you need to be prepared. The people behind this operation, they're not just going to roll over. We're talking about serious criminal charges, fraud, kidnapping, falsifying medical records. I don't care about the risks to myself," Daniel insisted. "I just want justice for my girls." Carolyn's expression grew grave. "The risks may not be limited to you." As if summoned by her warning, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text. "Unknown number. Drop the investigation if you want your family to remain safe. Some secrets should stay buried." He showed it to Carolyn, whose face tightened. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. These people have resources and connections. They've clearly been monitoring you. All the more reason to push forward," Daniel said, though a cold knot of fear had formed in his stomach. "I won't be intimidated." On the drive home, Daniel found himself checking his rearview mirror repeatedly. Was that black sedan following him, or was his paranoia growing? His phone rang through the car's speakers. Margaret Crawford. "Daniel." Her voice was tense. "Someone broke into our house today. Nothing was taken, but Emily's adoption paperwork is missing, and there was a note. It said we should reconsider our position." Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Are you and Emily safe?" "James took us to a hotel for now." "Daniel, I'm scared. These people, whoever they are, they have a lot to lose if this becomes public." "We can't back down," Daniel said, though his own fear was mounting. "We have to see this through." That evening, as Daniel explained the situation to Lily, simplified for an 8-year-old's understanding, her reactions ranged from confusion to wonder to excitement. "So Emily is really my twin sister? And she's been my sister all along?" she asked, her eyes wide. That's why we look the same and like the same things? Yes, sweetheart. You were born together, but some bad people told us she had died. She was taken away and given to the Crawfords. Lily's brow furrowed. But why would anyone do that? Daniel struggled to find words an 8-year-old could comprehend. Because they wanted money, and they didn't care about hurting families to get it. Are the bad people going to get in trouble now? I hope so, Daniel said. I'm working with a lawyer to make sure they do. Is Emily going to come live with us? Lily asked, her voice eager. The question Daniel had been dreading. It's complicated, Lil. Emily has grown up with the Crawfords. They're her family too, even though they didn't know how they got her. We're going to have to figure out a way for all of us to be part of her life. Before bed, Lily insisted on setting up her stuffed animals in twin arrangements. So when Emily visits, she'll have her own bear next to mine, she explained. The simple gesture brought tears to Daniel's eyes. Later that night, another text arrived. Last warning? Walk away or there will be consequences. We know where the girls go to school. Daniel immediately called Detective Rivera, whom Carolyn had connected him with. They're threatening my daughters now, he said, his voice shaking with rage. I'll increase patrol near both residences and the school, Rivera promised. But Mr. Hayes, these people are well connected. We need more concrete evidence to move against them directly. I have Judith's testimony, Daniel argued. The word of one discredited nurse against a network of respected professionals. We need more. The next morning, Daniel was startled by a knock at his door. James Crawford stood on his porch, looking haggard. We need to talk, he said without preamble. Margaret and I have been discussing this nonstop. We want to do the right thing for Emily. Daniel led him into the kitchen. What does that mean exactly? James ran a hand through his disheveled hair. We've been her parents for 8 years. We love her more than anything. But we can't ignore the truth of how she came to us. I'm not trying to take her from you, Daniel said, surprising himself with the admission. I just want her to know her birth family. To know Lily. To know about Sarah. We understand that now. James pulled out his phone and showed Daniel a photo. Emily and Lily at school, sitting side by side, identical grins on their faces. Look at them. How did we not see it immediately? The universe has a way of bringing truth to light. Before Daniel could respond, his phone rang. Margaret, her voice frantic. Emily's gone. I was in the shower, and when I came out, she's not in the hotel room. What? Both men exclaimed in unison. The door was locked from the inside. She couldn't have just wandered off. Margaret's voice broke. There was a note pushed under the door. It says if we want to see her again, all evidence related to the case must be destroyed and the investigation dropped. James went pale. I'm on my way, he told his wife, then turned to Daniel. They've taken her. The people behind this, they're silencing us. Daniel was already reaching for his car keys, his heart thundering in his chest. Call Detective Rivera. I'll meet you at the hotel. As he rushed to his car, he realized with growing horror, they'd threatened both girls. He called Lily's school in a panic, only to be told that she was safely in her classroom. For now. These people had stolen his daughter once. He wouldn't let them take either of his children again. The next 72 hours were the longest of Daniel's life. Emily's kidnapping triggered an Amber Alert and brought the full force of law enforcement into the investigation. Detective Rivera, now fully convinced of the conspiracy's danger, assembled a task force dedicated to finding Emily and exposing the trafficking operation. Daniel barely slept, dividing his time between comforting a frightened Lily, coordinating with the Crawfords, and working with investigators. The case that had seemed so personal suddenly exploded into a media sensation when leaked details about the baby trafficking ring hit the news. We've identified key players, Rivera reported during an emergency meeting in the police station conference room. Dr. Mercer fled the country yesterday, but we have agents monitoring all ports and airports. 3 administrators from Northbrook Hospital have been brought in for questioning. Margaret Crawford, who hadn't stopped crying since Emily's disappearance, looked up hopefully. But no sign of Emily? Not yet, Rivera admitted. But we've traced the threatening text to a burner phone purchased by a former security guard at Angeline's Children. We're closing in. James placed a protective arm around his wife. We have to find her. And we will, Daniel promised, though his own fear threatened to choke him. Emily's smart. And she's strong. The breakthrough came unexpectedly on the morning of the third day. Judith Winters burst into the police station, clutching a manila envelope. I've been hiding these for years, she told Daniel and Detective Rivera breathlessly. Waiting for the right moment. For someone brave enough to take them on. She slid a stack of documents across the table. Complete records of every baby stolen through Northbrook Hospital, dates, birth parents' names, falsified death certificates, and the families who adopted them. Plus financial records showing payments to doctors, nurses, and officials. Rivera flipped through the documents, his expression growing harder with each page. This is exactly what we needed. Dr. Mercer's signature is on most of these. And look, he pointed to a name. Senator Wilson's daughter is listed as one of the receiving parents. Within hours, arrests began across 3 states. The operation that had remained hidden for over a decade crumbled under the weight of Judith's evidence. By evening, a terrified administrative assistant from Angeline's Children broke down during interrogation and revealed Emily's location, a vacant property owned by one of the agency's founders. The rescue operation moved with precision. Daniel insisted on being nearby, waiting in an unmarked police car with his heart in his throat as tactical teams surrounded the house. When Rivera finally approached, the expression on his face told Daniel everything he needed to know. She's safe, the detective confirmed. A little dehydrated and scared, but unharmed. Emily emerged from the house wrapped in a shock blanket, her copper hair tangled, her eyes wide but alert. When she spotted Daniel among the vehicles, she broke away from the female officer escorting her and ran to him. You came, she said simply, as if she'd never doubted it. Daniel knelt to her level, his vision blurring with tears. Of course we did. We've been looking everywhere for you. I knew you would. Emily's voice was steady despite everything she'd been through. I wasn't scared. Not really. I kept thinking about Lily, and how she would be brave, so I was brave too. Margaret and James arrived minutes later, rushing to embrace their daughter with sobs of relief. Daniel stepped back, giving them space for their reunion, but Emily reached out and caught his hand. Don't go, she said. You're my family too. 1 month later, Daniel sat on a bench in Riverfront Park, watching Lily and Emily chase each other across the grass. The legal complexities of their situation were far from resolved: custody arrangements, testimonies for the ongoing criminal trials, counseling for both girls to help them process everything. But today was about celebration, not complications. They're identical yet so different, Margaret observed, sitting beside him. Their relationship had evolved into a tentative friendship, bound by their shared love for the girls. Emily's always been more cautious than Lily. Sarah was like that, Daniel said softly. Always looking before leaping. Lily gets her impulsiveness from me. Do you think we're doing the right thing? Margaret asked, watching the twins with anxious eyes. This shared custody arrangement, it's so unconventional. Daniel nodded. The girls need each other. And they need all of us. The courts may not understand what we're trying to do, but it's what's best for them. James joined them, carrying a tray of ice creams. The DA called this morning. 3 more guilty pleas from hospital staff. Mercer was apprehended in Venezuela yesterday. Good, Daniel said firmly. They deserve to pay for what they did. The investigation had revealed the full scope of the operation. 43 babies stolen over 12 years, sold to wealthy families for enormous sums. The scandal had rocked the medical establishment and prompted investigations into private adoption agencies nationwide. Daddy! Margaret! Look what we found! Lily called, racing toward them with Emily close behind. In her outstretched palm was a perfect 4-leaf clover. Emily spotted it first, but I picked it, We're sharing the luck. Very appropriate, James said with a smile. As the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of gold and rose, the girls sprawled on a blanket nearby, whispering secrets and giggling. Their matching copperheads bent close together, finishing each other's sentences as if making up for 8 years of separation. Daniel took out his phone and snapped a photo, capturing the moment. Then he noticed Margaret doing the same thing. For the scrapbook we're making them, she explained. So they'll always know both sides of their story. Daniel nodded, grateful for her understanding. Sarah would have liked you, he said suddenly. She would be happy knowing Emily had you all these years, even with everything else that happened. The twins looked up at the sound of Sarah's name, as if some invisible thread connected them to her memory. Emily, who had never known her birth mother, yet somehow remembered her lullaby, asked, Will you tell us more stories about her tonight? Absolutely, Daniel promised. Every story I can remember. As dusk fell and fireflies began to blink in the gathering darkness, Daniel watched his daughters. Together at last, their bond unbroken despite everything designed to separate them. The road ahead would be complicated, but they would navigate it as a family, unconventional, unexpected, but unquestionably where they all belonged. Some bonds, he realized, were simply too powerful to be broken. Not by distance. Not by deception. Not even by time itself. The universe had indeed found a way to bring the truth to light, reuniting what should never have been divided. And now, no one would ever separate them again.